Although it's a bit dark, isn't it? Well, Australia is the 51st state of the USA apparently, so we have to pretend it's dark matter or some crap like that. It's obviously not, but we'll do it anyway. Okay, so dark matter is a sort of aristocratic reaction to the plebeians having workers' rights in an extreme fashion and being confronted with the possibility that poor people could be smarter than them. Anyway, look, that's a simple answer for it. It talks about like Curtis Yarvin level stuff. However, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of how different social movements were countermeasured using people's anxieties to get there, we'll have to have a look a little bit into, say, the genuine causes for concern that some men had about feminism in anti-racism movements, in the way that they were presented with those ideas, not in terms of their sentiments. So we'll talk about, and that we need to talk about the difference between the systemic and the personal. Systemic. We heard a fire alarm somewhere, but the space we're in is not on fire. There's no smoke either. Okay? Yeah. Personal, no fire. Systemic, suggestion of a fire somewhere else. Okay, right. Okay, that might be good. My serendipitous timing to describe that idea. So, anyway, systemic. Okay, it is actually the case that women were treated as property in the legal in European system that other countries sort of had adopted partly and changed over time. It was the case that women were property. It went way back to Hammurabi. Actually, it wasn't even European, it was Babylonian, and it was ancient as shit. So there was a systemic thing that came from that, and that system went on for quite some time, and various and sundry iterations and whatever else, and gradually, they say, got peeled off during the Industrial Revolution, with bits and pieces before that, mostly after the Industrial Revolution. And so the image that they're presenting there is that industrial capitalism is the harbinger of freedom. Okay? There are people who take exception to that because industrial capitalism or the Industrial Revolution hasn't necessarily been the harbinger of freedom. What the actual harbinger of freedom is within industrial capitalism or the Industrial Revolution is the working class people banding together for a common cause, namely their rights, which were being curtailed by industrial encroachment. So, the tragedy of the commons is the key argument to be made. In the English example, they had no ownership of land before that. They were actively discriminated against based on their gender and their social class. They were even discriminated in terms of the choice of words they could use to describe each other and the food that they ate. So, by the later stages, pronouns were legislated to be class-based. And then in a couple of centuries after that, then they started to have the Industrial Revolutions and to unwind and change the nature of the structure of property within that system. Nonetheless, during the feudal period, the only place that the commoners were allowed to graze their livestock were on the commons, and it wasn't cattle, it was sheep and goat. Cattle was on the main farm owned by the lord or lady. Not the lady at all, actually, the lord. Lady couldn't own property. Technically, an aristocratic lady was the property of the aristocratic lord. So it was very, very, the feudal system was very, very strict, hierarchical and stuff like that. In terms of the freedoms that the feudal people enjoyed, they worked 150 days per year. There are people out there who'd hear that and they'd probably go, well, you know what, that sounds better. The thing is, though, for that 150 days per year, they were, regardless of what crops they worked on or what livestock they worked on, they weren't getting a direct benefit from that produce. There was crops and livestock that they were allowed to have, and others that were for the feudal system itself and aristocracy. So they didn't have necessarily have direct control over their consumption patterns either. Their choices were in fact limited based on class or based on their social station. And that is what. How do we know this? Because as recently as the potato famine in Ireland of the 1860s or 1870s or thereabouts, there was a consequence of that. The potato famine, they say, was not caused by the blight on potatoes, but by the fact that the Irish peasants were not allowed to eat anything else. They had plenty of wheat growing, they had plenty of barley growing, they had plenty of other crops going, but they were only allowed to eat the potatoes. So just bear that in mind. Okay, for a minute. Discrimination historically, in the European sense of the term, varied considerably by region. However, the British example is probably the most pertinent because of their influence globally through the English language and what caused that to be an influence in the first place, only with people travelling in the colonial period and whatever else. The discrimination was not necessarily just men were the boss and women were not. It was rich people were the boss and no one else was. There was only rich people and people with nothing. And occasionally merchants who sort of hovered in the middle and sold stuff and travelled around and weren't really they were technically serfs, but they interacted a bit more broadly. And sometimes experienced what was called upward social mobility. So as it turns out, that merchant class and the aristocratic class had started to forge stronger relations during the Renaissance. So by the time the Industrial Revolution came along, there was a burgeoning merchant class that was kind of like socially entwined with the aristocracy, and the birth of the corporations and the associated Industrial Revolution meant that they were both profiting from the activities of the Industrial Revolution, whereas the rest of the serfs were being relegated to whatever menial tasks that the Industrial Revolution provided, without the commons to graze their sheep and their goats and grow their particular crops for consumption, in Ireland, potatoes. They were subjected to taking the coal train down to London and basically being enslaved in the workhouse there. And of course, that typically didn't work out for people. A lot of people became destitute, and those destitute people filled prison ships and came to Australia in a lot of cases. So, but not necessarily all of them. So, that type of discrimination was discrimination against men. First and foremost, those particular individuals were ripped off as men. Men is like 90% of the men in that society were serfs and were ripped off. They were not paid wages for working on the Lord's land. When the lords and the feudal lords and the merchant class got together, they expected them to labour in the workhouses again without wages. We're talking about people who were given rations, people who were given something that you wouldn't necessarily qualify as a wage at all. It was so piss poor. The working hours and conditions were pathetic, to say the least. In some cases, worse than what you would call third world conditions these days. You know, sweatshops they talk about where things are horrible and nasty. They're pretty fucking bad. They're almost at that level though. Okay, and to get to that level, it's pretty bad. Like these are people who are choking on coal smoke, and fucking had no fucking plumbing or sanitation whatsoever. Who were working 18 hours a day, 6 days a fucking week, living in big piles on top of each other, competing for work in sweatshop conditions with absolutely no workers' rights whatsoever. So at this point, you can imagine that the English and British serf was starting to get upset. Predominantly, the people that worked in those conditions were men. The seamstresses were typically women, so there was jobs that women were allowed to get. They were paid even less. The death rate for London seamstresses was quite high, typically from malnutrition and overwork. And so as a consequence of that, even during the Industrial Revolution, you can see an outgrowth of the roles that appeared before that being gendered, but nonetheless still the case that the working man is still discriminated against quite heavily by the establishment, and the woman is second fiddle. So this idea of men are completely fucking ripped off. So why are the women fucking complaining for? Is sort of a bit much, because it's a genuine look at history shows the men have definitely been ripped off. That's not in dispute. The history also shows, however, that the social movements to try and to get away from the aristocracies and to curtail the negativities of the Industrial Revolution were predominantly male-driven trade union style movements and social movements intended to uh, to change the structure of society and the economy in such a manner that people could in fact get um, fair wages, workers' wages and conditions, have days off, sick pay, holiday pay, eventually, and stuff like that. These are all things that are 20th century innovations. Superannuation is something that's after the 1970s. It's not even that old. So there's this gradual introduction and of these what you call benefits. They just weren't there before. The idea of someone having an illness or a disability and getting a pension from the government and living in their own independent housing far away from their birth family, and as an unchaperoned female, is, according to feudal standards, impossible. In feudal standards, that would have been impossible. In industrial revolution standards, that would have been negligible, if not impossible. It would have been genuinely impossible. And in the 20th century, it would have been unlikely. It is really only a product of the 21st century that that's the case. So those workmen who worked really hard to get their workers' rights and stuff like that also worked really hard to create what you call the social democratic nation states with pensions, workmen's rights, and things like that. There was a economic battle, however, that the capitalists and the industrialists played on the insecurities of the working class men when it came to working women after the 1940s. So during the 1940s, there was that horrible World War. And so in a lot of places where there were battles going on, or people, the men were taken conscripted into draft, which, by the way, conscription is a means by which men were ripped off like you would not fucking believe. But anyway, the women went to the factories at that point, got paid, half the wages that the men would have. Were told, when your husband gets home, he can have your job. And if he did, that happens. And then she went back home to the kitchen and cooked him some pie. Now, under those conditions, the industrialists said, well, the industrialists might have actually been happy maybe to have women work there because they were getting paid less. They were therefore making more profit. On the other hand, though, they were under enormous social pressure for the workmen to keep their jobs. They were under social pressure from the church groups and religious groups to do that as well, because of traditional gender roles having been associated with religion. The aristocratic class no longer had a say in that. So it was the Grand Viziers that used to back up the kings with that particular brand of ideology were all that remained in the traditions and customs and religions of the people concerned. So as the 1950s and 1960s rolled on, people started to were becoming more agnostic and atheistic and starting to let go of those religions, and the Grand Viziers were losing control. As the Grand Viziers were starting to lose control, the people that started to gain control were the women. The women were starting to rebel. And believe it or not, the men were supporting them. The men were supporting them with the Gay Rights Liberation Front. So since the Gay Liberation Movement was a means by which to support women, it's an indirect fashion, it's male-centered and everything else, but you cannot think of a better means to completely make fun of traditional gender roles than to see a grown-ass man with a beard doing female impersonation. Okay? That just held a mirror to society and said, you know what? That ain't what they actually do, but it does look fucking silly. And so so in some respects, where the language used to have it, like the demonization of the gay man, was connected to the enslavement of the woman. Okay, because the gay man was called a woman, among other things. So, like hop, skip, and jump was calling the woman that, and that was completely unfair because it turns out the priests were playing silly buggers with the altar boys, and well, that took them a long time to get that Royal Commission on that one, 50 years. 50 years, and unsurprisingly, the Royal Commissions that showed who the real hypocrites were, the Grand Viziers, also showed that some of the victims in that situation were the gay men, although not all the survivors that were gay, but some of them were. But they're also victims of slander and defamation, even they weren't victims of that particular series of criminal conducts and cover-ups. So, this idea of God loves and protects you all is ludicrous to people who are familiar with the gay rights movement or familiar with women's lib. There is a strong association of atheism, or at the very least anti-Vaticanism, with the gay rights movement and the women's lib movement. It's very difficult to support the idea of any deity at all. What was supporting gay rights or women's rights in the sort of Anglophone context. It's strongly associated with atheism because atheism is just easy to reject it. Take your Vatican and shove it. And so when the feminism sort of started to happen and stuff like that, some of the men got afraid that they wouldn't get jobs. It's a bit like when the corporates moved the jobs overseas to poorer countries, okay, like in the 1980s and 1990s to get cheap labour, okay. They blamed the foreigners for that. When those people that in turn tried to be migrants to the country where the corporation came from, those countries said, "Oh, can't have economic migrants and stuff like this." Like, well, you just created them. And so the issue, you just created them though. And so when that happened, like they tried to create that meme called "They took our jobs," right? So you had these guys that used to complain that women took their jobs, or women were going to take their jobs, and then they had this complaint that the migrants took their jobs. It was like that's not what happened. What happened was that that women were joining the workforce, right? This is not even a joke. It was also men that have been ripped off in the overseas non-English speaking countries, okay, like Southeast Asia or whatever, okay, or Africa or something like. Usually Southeast Asia, or China, for example, Taiwan maybe. You know, the corporates have gone and moved their corporations over there to get the labour over there practically for free. They're looking for cheap labour, so they go to the poorer country, right, and they get their cheaper labour there. Yeah. And then I wonder why their customers in the so-called rich countries have no money to buy their products. So they have no customers because those people have no jobs to pay for their products, you know. And so, and they go, oh, I wonder that they're in a recession. Well, they're in a recession because the people that they're expecting to be the customers ain't got a job to pay for the product. And they've taught them to say they took our jobs, but actually those people were being oppressed by whatever historical circumstances that they encountered, and the corporations have taken advantage of that. And so it goes back again to the workmen's rights fucking movement, yet again, where you go, well, actually, that battle isn't about women versus men. That battle is a battle of the merchant class versus the people, or the people versus the billionaires. So that's where that argument comes from. It's the people versus the billionaires. Where's your class solidarity? Where's your class consciousness? Right? So in that respect, it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, male, or fucking female, black, white, or fucking brindle, or if you speak English or not. Okay, it's the people versus the billionaires. And so one of the great accomplishments. Uh, don't worry about the language. Like of what the United States empire that happened. So they call it the American century in their jingoistic jargon and propaganda. And so like everything since World War II is America this and America that, America the Great, and America and so these other countries were acting as the labor pool for the United States corporations. America became an example of that, of how that happened. So as cheap labor was sought in Asian countries, the American people were struggling to pay for the products. And so they started to get lines of credit and credit card debt, and so their sort of their national debt and their personal debt started to accumulate. So that sort of systemic look at things shows that's not personal. When feudalism was a form of bonded labor, was a form of, that wasn't even bonded labor because you couldn't work it off and 7 years later you'd be free. You were stuck on that estate for your life. Your pappy and your grandpappy was fucking stuck on that estate. Okay, you didn't get a fucking wage. Okay, it might as well have been slavery. They actually were the property of the on the asset register of the feudal lords. So technically they were fucking property. So technically it was fucking slavery. And so what that system did after they temporarily depropertified the serfs or the working class in Britain and Europe, okay, and turn them into wage slaves as opposed to regular slaves, is they did actual slavery in other places. Okay, they did actual slavery with the North Atlantic slave trade. They did actual slavery in terms of segregation in South Africa and Australia and places like that. They did actual slavery of people in India and other countries. Actual slavery. So they repeated, the aristocracy repeated their behaviour in a different location because they weren't getting away with it in their location anymore. They moved it somewhere else, and so that same patterning of the corporations happened as well. The corporations were being asked to pay better wages there, so they moved and they sought greater resources and profits by profiting off of slavery in those countries too. And the working class became destitute, and then they became economic migrants, or also known as convicts, but they were bonded as indentured servants for 7 years, ticket of transportation and leave. Okay? So basically, that system has continued in a different fashion. Okay? It's continued in a different fashion. Okay? You've got wage slaves, people who aren't paid very much, okay, for the same type of work in a different country to yours. Okay? They do the same job that you would do in your country, but get paid less. It might be better money than they could get otherwise in their country, but it's still less than they could get in yours. To try and balance that out to make it like it's equality, your country turns around and says, we're going to jack the rent prices up, we're going to jack the price of everything up. Okay, that's all fucking rigged. In the case of the United States, they have Aladdin software with Larry Fink. Here's an example of the merchant class completely mechanising the process of ripping people off. Their private equity system is just there, like just corporations, and chuck a few shares in the software and just jumble it up a little bit. Next thing you know, you can press a red button whenever it feels like a crash a stock exchange. So it's not always Donald Trump that's doing it. It's not always your government. It wasn't always George Bush. It wasn't always Bill Clinton. It wasn't always President Obama, okay, or even Biden. It was Larry Fink. It was Larry Fink, and it was the corporations more generally, and how the corporations own the corporations own the corporations. So you're in a situation where entire industries designed for profit only, okay, have continuously raised their prices in the hopes that it raises their profits, but they haven't necessarily been able to raise their incomes, okay, in a manner without raising their debts. Okay, the consumers and others bore the brunt by getting credit cards, getting personal loans, and so on and so forth. In 2008, you had the GFC as a consequence of that. Faulty lending practices, what they call predatory lending practices on America's poor, who could not afford those loans and were misled to believe that they could. As a consequence, loans bought from loans meant there was a tiered structure of businesses that started to crumble when those loans were not able to be paid back. And so that sort of lending strategy that caused the GFC is an example of how the American dream that they sold those people was just that. Why is it called the American dream? Okay, because when you wake up, you realize it's fucking bullshit, and you were sleeping. Okay, that's when you wake up, it's realize it's bullshit. Okay, it's running on debt, and so it's systemic stuff versus the personal stuff. In the personal account of things, people's personal accounts vary quite considerably. Where there was genuine cases of slavery and segregation, racism, sexism, and discrimination of all types in every society that you might encounter, okay, in that story, there were also cases of the Schindlers of the world, people who forged passports so the Jews could get out of fucking Germany and Poland and France. You know, the French resistance in the underground. Okay, in America you get Harriet Tubman. Okay, in the 1940s Germany you get Schindler. You get people like that in Australia as well. You get cases like that in Australia. You get cases like that in South Africa as well. You know, it wasn't just Nelson Mandela who was leading the revolution against apartheid there. It was other people. An unnamed Schindler, and no, it was not Elon Musk. But it's more the point that those people exist everywhere and always have. There's people who are trying to put the effort in to make things better for the community, to help out, to overcome the injustices. And there are people who don't protest, people who don't do picket lines, people who are quietly working away in their lives, who do subtle little gestures to teach people how to overcome that system, to teach people to become a little bit more rebellious, to challenge it, to find a way, a workaround and stuff like that. Okay, you know, go over there and talk, talk to that one, right? It relates like that. Okay. Play dumb black fella. Play dumb woman, play dumb black fella. What about play dumb white man? Okay. Play dumb black fella and play dumb woman. Okay. Okay. You need to say play dumb white man. Have you ever heard the phrase play dumb white man? Okay. Play bogan. Yeah. Play MAGA. Okay, play MAGA. Okay, those people can see that if someone like Trump got elected, their country's fucked. But those Democrats will start screaming, and they'll stop resting on their laurels and pretending that the Democratic Party actually solved anything. Okay, I start to see that both parties are fucked. Some people in the MAGA camp could see that. Okay? They were playing dumb white person. Yeah. They would have been playing dumb white person. Okay? There are people who play dumb white person a lot. Okay? To play dumb white man. Yeah. Oh yeah, the white man's responsible for everything fucking happened. Well, no, he is not, because the white man's technically a serf who was transported to a foreign country against his free will and consent because corporations and aristocracies wanted to rip off the entirety of the fucking planet. Okay, he's no better off than you, surely. It's like, well, no, he's not really. However, historically, it needs to take into consideration that there was genuine acts of discrimination based on race and gender, and the white man benefited. No, the white man didn't benefit. The white man was not as bad off as the other one. So this confusion between pain relief and pleasure needs to be sorted out. Okay, if you take a class 2 opiate or something like that for pain relief, like maybe Tramadol or something like that, okay, that doesn't give you pleasure. That gives you pain relief. Okay, it is not actually causing you to benefit so much as it's attempting to remove something that's adverse to your well-being. So when they took away, okay, the serfdom of the poor white man, okay, and they introduced the right to a wage and the right to own property and the right to vote, yes, the white man benefited. However, he was then subjected to a codependency relationship with the merchant class, which was intending to replace the aristocracy and had previously been its butt buddy. So technically, the white man in that story is just another example of how different social strata are forcibly created through the toxic, freaking false demographics of the aristocratic regimes to create false polarities between them and people of colour and women. Okay, those particular individuals, okay, did have more rights than black people, did have more rights than Jews, and did have more rights than women. Okay, you talk about the 1940s and parts of the 1950s as well as your clear examples. Absolutely they did. But that was the first time in their lives and the first time in their ancestors' lives that they had any rights at all. And that's the point you need to understand. That was the first time the white man had any rights at all. Okay, those other people under that system never had rights before. Women were property, yes, definitely. Okay, under the North Atlantic slave trade, the black people, of course they were fucking property. That was a slave system, an overt one, and a cruel one at that. Okay, however, the 1950s was the first time that the white man had rights at all. And so when the other group said, me too, please, okay, the corporates turned around and said, but that'll make you lose your jobs. And then they turned around and gave those jobs to other countries that were still trying to get rights for their black people, for their Asian people who'd been subjected to different forms of aristocracies there. Whether those aristocracies originated in Europe during the colonial period or were there for thousands of years before, such as, the Chinese imperial kingdoms and whatever else. Okay, so when the white man first got rights at all in the 1950s, okay, he didn't necessarily have a problem with other people having rights as well in his heart. In his head, he was full of propaganda and fucking lies from centuries of social conditioning and, of course, the most immediate set of circumstances. And he was told to play dumb white man and bend his head down and say, oh, don't nigga be a dumbie. A nigga be a dummy. He might be no good on that fucking goddamn machine. Yeah, white man be better for it. His culture got worse at technology. They had invented the wheel, right? So he'd play dumb white man. Okay, and not all white men did that. Some white men went, well, that's bullshit. If you don't do the trade union thing properly, do fair pay for fair work and fair wage for fucking everyone. Okay, if you can do the work, you get the pay, you get the job, stiff shit. Yeah, and so the way the corporates pitted everyone against each other is absolutely insane how they've done it. They pitted the white men against everyone else in the 1950s, yes, which led to the other groups becoming opposed to the white man, okay? And then, as a consequence, the white men said, why are you opposed to him for? He only first got rights in the 1950s, haven't you noticed? And some of those rights have now been taken away. What do you mean your rights have been taken away? Well, you can't get a fucking job now. Yeah, but that's not because of the black women or the women, the blacks or the Jews or the Asians or whatever in your country or even overseas, okay? It's because of the corporations. The corporations did that to both of you, and they own the media, and they lied to you, and they told you that it was the feminists that caused it. They told you it was the anti-racism brigade that caused it. They told you it was freaking people who were protesting Hitler that caused that. No, they told you that because they were benefiting from you believing that. It was the corporations the entire time. It was the aristocracy the entire time. Has been for fucking centuries. Okay, so the idea that all white men have always hated, all people of color or whatever, is crap. So when you sort of get that sort of messaging coming out from people who might be from social demographics that got included in the group with so-called rights, practically yesterday, like say, a black woman in America, for example, would be a good example of that. And I start talking about, say, the white man this and the white man that, and you say, well, okay then, if your ancestors were black African fucking slaves, you're probably going to be a bit stressed out about that term, particularly considering segregation only ended in the 1960s or 70s. And so you're from the generation that only just grew up after it ended, and they got a lot of work to do to clean out the fucking 400 years of the N-word. So yes, you're not going to have any fucking trust. However, if you've got an accurate appraisal of history and you're being fair about it, it's not that the white man had more rights than you. It's not that the white man had more rights than you. It's that you didn't have any rights at all. Okay, he had fuck all rights until the 1950s, and then she's come along and her ancestors had no rights and actually been actively fucking abused and was even worse off in the stratification system, and so that sort of relative deprivation thing is a case of were someone avoiding being punched in the fucking face if they dobbed on someone else, or was someone punched in the face once, or was someone literally fucking on the ground having their shit kicked down with a fucking baton? In all cases, you're talking about subjugated and oppressed people who, in some cases, got rights yesterday. Okay, including white people. And so some of those white people are upset that they've been treated like that they were willing subjugators of other people. Now, yes, they did subjugate other people. Yes, they did fucking say the stupid fucking horrible fucking words that the regime told them. Yes, they generated some of them. Yes, they even voted for and supported some of them sometimes. Yes, they did lynchings. Yes, they did all of those things. But they also helped Harriet Tubman. They also were Mr. Schindler. Okay? There were also countless other people of a similar ilk who quietly fucking dropped seed bombs everywhere they fucking could to get around that yes massive fucking phenomena that everyone's been subjected to. And yes, they sat there and questioned things, but were afraid to talk about it as well. Didn't comprehend it. Didn't have the language to fucking describe it. The white men lost their sons and daughters through the forced adoptions. The white men lost their sons and daughters through the stolen generation. For every black woman in Australia who had her child ripped from her arms, and it's an act of barbaric cruelty that his pain and shame has barely been touched on, and some of which are concerned that there was a white man involved in that. There's a white man in the background who doesn't know if he's a father at all, had no say in that fucking process, and probably became an alcoholic as a result. And probably had to cover up any affairs he had because, well, you can't be going down darky fucking lane because you might not make it home. You know, most of the people wouldn't do that, but there's someone would, because in every society where this has happened, there's been a small number of dumb fucking idiot fucking genuine MAGA type cunts, okay, who are on the absolute extreme end who would willingly join the fucking Nazi party, and then you've got everyone else who's either actively questioning it, subtly countermandering it, or openly rebelling. And over the course of time, open rebellion becomes greater, not lesser. And the louder those fucking dumb fucking MAGA voices, fascist voices speak, the louder that rebellion becomes. And that's what you're seeing in the USA. So, before white people in the USA are too hard on themselves, okay, just remember, if you didn't personally freaking do that subjugation, you're not responsible for it. Now, there's this idea of you and anyone else inheriting the subtle prejudices of ideas and beliefs and attitudes called the haughty, condescending stuff. Oh shit, yeah, the men have got that. The white men have got that in spades. In particular, the men have got it in general. Okay, every society you go to, the men have it in general. Okay, but it varies. But if there's other beliefs or whatever there, then it might, sort of soften the blow a little bit. Okay, so, it's not, however, the case that systemic problem is a personal problem, because again, every time you have a society that says women are property, you've got men who don't want to treat her like that because they can see that she can breathe and talk, and he wants to treat her with respect. Okay, so the men who go, well, I don't want to disrespect that woman. Okay, haven't necessarily checked their privilege in terms of the attitudes and beliefs that lead them to disrespect that woman, but none the fucking less, they don't want to. And so are you in a situation, United States of America, where you not wanting something hasn't been enough, and you know how having to do something is what is required? I mean, are you going to join the America Party? Are you serious? That guy broke your fucking trust. And so we have it again and again, okay? Republicans broke people's trust, Democrats broke people's trust, blah, blah, fucking blah. And look, now you've gone down fucking the toady fucking lane with the freaking Mango Mussolini, you call him. And you're there going, well, he's like that because he's a toxic white male fucking conservative. He represents all the fucking hyper-fascist leanings of the USA. And it's like, well, okay then. He's the mirror that's being held up to you, right? Okay, and guess what? You put him there. You put him there by not voting. You put him there by voting. You put him there by not being active in your community discussions. You put him there by pushing away those people who are playing dumb white men. And because you pushed away those people that played dumb white men, okay, they didn't understand what you were talking about. Okay, they were there. They were there with their up to their eyeballs in fucking debt. They were there. In working 18 hours a day, 6 days a week in the factories. They were there in trains and irons being transported to the colonial places that ripped your native peoples off. Okay. They were there on the picket lines trying to get better fucking wages. They were there trying to picket to get the right to own property and vote. Okay, they were there being conscripted. Okay, so they're upset at you for ignoring them. The white man is upset at you for ignoring them, and you relegated them to one place. Totally fascist filth. Okay, that's where they felt like they were sent. The white man felt like he was sent there. Okay, the white man who had a borderline personality disorder dichotomous value system that was an entrenchment of that imperial mindset of him wanting to be the aristocrat. He wanted to be the aristocrat. He wanted to be better than. He wanted to be petted by his word. He admired men who could control others. He admired people who displayed prowess. Okay? That kind of character, okay, felt like he was pushed to the far right. And he is accustomed to not taking responsibility in other ways, so he blames you, the left wing. Okay? He blames you, the left wing. Okay? And says, well, okay then. He got fucking conned. You did say it. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the left wing said, well, actually, it's the corporates. Okay? Can you see that patriarchy was invented by the corporates and the aristocracy and the fucking religions was enslaved both to the feminists? And the media went around and said, no, the women hate the men. But no, actually, feminism was saying that both were enslaved and the subjugation of women was conditional on the subjugation of men through the way that they designed the gender roles to support said fucking social systems and structures. It doesn't mean at the personal level that all of them were actually living it out. It just means that that's how it was designed. Okay? Okay, and no, but the media fucking said that you got to listen to the TV and you got to listen to the authority figures. Someone will pull you out of that. Listening to the fucking authorities will pull you away from this. The priest's always right. Will pull you away from the Pope's always right. Will pull you away from the president knows everything. Will pull you away from the pulpit scientism. Will pull you away from there. Okay, now do you see who's really fucking benefiting from this? Well, it's not any of you, is it, plebeians? It never has been. Right? You're not benefiting from pensions. You're not benefiting from superannuation. You're not benefiting from universal education. You're not benefiting from the right to vote and participate in elections or even be the president, prime minister, or other forms of elected representative. You haven't benefited from having the option if your social standing allowed you to and equal opportunity allowed you to, which you probably don't, given your demographic history and the way that people will likely treat you based on their instilled prejudices from said media and said history, and that's to have those opportunities and whatever else. Okay. white man, you're not going to get a job now because Asian men think that you're stupid. Okay, okay. The Asian men think you're a bunch of racist, stupid people. Okay, who supported a predatory fucking papal fucking system for 1,500 years when it was obviously sounding fucking lame and fucking stupid to anyone who took a cursory fucking glance at the Jesus creation fucking myth. And went, well, why are they doing that for? That sounds fucking crap. And so the Asian men are looking at you going, you're fucking dumb. Okay? They are. They're looking at you going, you're fucking dumb. Looking at going, all white men look the fucking same. And you know that. But until Mao Zedong owns all your corporations, until Mao Zedong fucking is your boss at work, and until Mao Zedong is denying you employment on the grounds that you're too white and too male, until you're classified as property under that system, until you're denied the right to vote because of that system, then you can't necessarily say the same thing. On the other hand, though, the Chinese people's experience of subjugation is a bit like how Russia overthrows dictators. They just replace them with another one. They overthrew the Tsars and they got Lenin and Stalin, and then they overthrew that and they had a softy named Gorbachev for a while and Yeltsin. When you know it, Putin showed up, and wow, what a mess the world is in now. Okay? This is overthrowing one dictator by replacing them with another type of mentality. That's Russian shit. That's fucking Chinese shit. Okay, it's got India all fucking over it, and it stinks like fucking Africa. Okay? But it also stinks like Europe, okay, for most of European history, particularly since the Roman Empire. Okay. Is democracy a failed experiment? Well, have we had democracy yet? Have we had democracy yet? If the elections are rigged because your mind is fucking rigged, because the media and propaganda has been screwing with your fucking head the entire fucking time, then yes, it's rigged. Okay. If the elections are fucking rigged because of Starlink or something like that, well, that's definitely fucking rigged. If elections are fucking rigged because only people with a certain types of income, personality, characteristics, and ability to socialise with certain individuals could possibly run for office in the first place, then yes, the election is fucking rigged. Okay. It's not necessarily the case that it's all about elections, is it? It's about what happens afterwards, or what happened before. Is democracy the great experiment that failed, or is democracy the great experiment that won? Has the thesis of democracy proven itself by breaking apart in the USA's example? Has the white man proven himself to really be an American idiot by doing that? Okay? Do you find that there's more complaints about America coming from Americans than, say, you do from Asian people? Do you think maybe some of those people who get those call centre jobs from the corporations that moved over there to India, for example, are glad that Dalits no longer have to mop floors so that they can work in call centres too? And with that money they can then go, see a doctor instead of wheeling themselves around on a skateboard when they lose release from cholera. Is it possibly the case that that's the viral disease called corporation, which moved itself from country to country and nation to state, was a democratizing force because of the reaction that the people had to having a sense of entitlement for the first time in their lives, as they acknowledged that actually they were ripped off before, but being ripped off under those conditions doesn't seem fair. Maybe they'd like to take over completely. It's not that the corporations are your friend. It's not that they're not. It's not that the aristocracy is your friends either, because they're definitely not. It's more the case of how the people have responded to it and how they've been conditioned to respond to it. Instead of seeing this world as a great bureaucracy, which is the stupid fascist assholes on the alt-right usually do, okay, how about we see it as a great freaking reaction, okay? So to see it as a Jacobite conspiracy, not the Masonic one, although they were connected to that, the Jacobite conspiracy, the conspiracy of that corporations led the workers' rights movement, not the workers. The conspiracy of trying to cover up for the efforts of the common people in their liberation by trying to claim that there was a saviour. Okay, the saviours came from organisations and secret societies and political parties and whatever else, and not the day-to-day efforts of people who you fail to acknowledge as doing those things, including MAGA Guy. Whilst he's sitting there fucking sucking on the Donald Trump Kool-Aid, he's also sitting there on the don't believe a single word they fucking say Kool-Aid. He's doing both. And for the people that watch him do that, he's showing a great irony. And those people are the ones that are putting in the effort. And for that, he's stimulating your social change. So maybe, in the great quagmire of mess of society you've got, maybe you should blame fucking everyone. Just blame everyone. And get over it.